John Riggs here. How are you feeling? I want to tell you the story of when I turned 2 games into 4 games. No, it's not these specific games. I know I held these up in the thumbnail and I'm showing them to you now. These are just for an example, just for the visual. But I turned 2 games that I had, didn't really play them, and I turned them into 4 games just because. Now this is, again, you got to think back to the early 90s. Right, I almost said 80s. It wasn't the late 80s. It had to have been the early 90s when I did this. Maybe 1990 specifically. I was huge into the NES. It was my favorite. It was my passion. It was like what I did. It was like my only hobby, basically. It was like I don't ask me about X-Files. Don't ask me about Friends. Especially don't ask me about Friends. Don't ask me about Seinfeld. I didn't really watch TV shows. I played video games, especially those on the Nintendo Entertainment System. But I didn't have a job. I went to school. I got like the one game for my birthday, the one game for Christmas. That was really about it. But I also would read these magazines. So if I wasn't playing games, and I rented a ton of games because that was also back in the day when your local video stores, sometimes your local gas stations would also have video games to rent, and I knew which games were at each one. I lived in proximity of 2 video rental stores that specialized in videos and video games. But then also we had like the local, we have a Safeway here, and they had a little video rental section, stuff like that too. Read a lot of magazines, and I had like, let's say GamePro. This is for example here. And in the back, I'm gonna show you this because it's integral to the story. There was this ad for Play It Again. It wasn't this specific one, but it was one kind of before Genesis. So this was all Nintendo games. And their thing is they have kind of a flat price. It's not just, one size fits all, but there's like, hey, for these games, it's this much. For these games, it's this much. Now, again, I didn't have a job. Didn't have a car. Didn't even know what a money order was back then. Certainly didn't have checks. And I absolutely didn't have a credit card. But I had games. And then looking in the back of that, I was like, they will buy my games back because they're just going to resell them anyway. However, I had 2 games at the time. I don't remember what they were. I wish I did. But I had 2 games at the time that, according to them, was worth a lot of money. One of them was Chubby Cherub. I remember that. And then the other one was something else too. I was like, I don't really need these anymore. However, if I sell them to them for this price, I'll get X amount of money back. I wonder if instead of taking the cash, I can take these other games off the cheaper menu. And for me, price wasn't an issue. Sure, games were different prices even back then, kind of, but not really. But I just wanted games that were fun, that would last me until my next time where I could either rent another game or get another game for my birthday or whatever. So I literally called them on the phone and said, all right, I have these 2 games. And they said, that's fantastic. And they treated me very nicely. They treated me as if we were doing a business deal, because we were. I said, well, I have these 2 games, but I was wondering if instead of getting paid for them, I could just choose these other games off the cheaper menu. And she said, yes, absolutely, of course. I remember it was a her. And she said, well, which games would you like? And I had my little thing there. I was like, well, I'll take, I remember Cybernator was one of them. Because Cybernator was a game that none of my rental stores had, and it looked kind of cool to me. So I was like, well, Cybernator, this one, and this one. And she's like, well, and choose 2 more, just in case we don't have those other ones, we'll give you something else instead. So I had like 2 backups just in case. And she said, okay, here's the address to send them to. I've never shipped anything before in my life at that time. So I literally put them in a cigar box because our neighbor across the street smoked cigars and would always give us the leftover boxes. So my mom could put, like sewing needle stuff in them and stuff like that, And so I put them in a box, mailed them out under this notion. And I had a little sheet in there too where it said, these 2 games for these 4 games. I spoke to whomever on the phone. That was that. And I was like, man, I hope that worked, because I just sent out 2 Nintendo games in the mail. This is before the internet. No tracking or anything. I was like, man alive. And it said like, 68 weeks or whatever it said in the thing. But sure enough, about 2 weeks later, it was about 2 weeks. I remember I was like, wow, that was quick. I get this package in the mail and I open it up and there's Cybernator right on front, which turns out wasn't the greatest game in the world, but it was something new. And then 3 other games. And 3 of the 4 games were my primary picks. And then one of them was that backup. Again, I don't remember the names of the games. We're talking again, literally 1990. I don't think it was 1989. It had to be 1990, maybe 1991 early. but I think it was right around 1990 when this happened. And when that happened, I was like, I just made the transaction of a lifetime. I am the wheeling and dealingest. I can play the stock market right now. I felt like I could do anything because, like, man, I just turned 2 games into 4 games. Never mind that the 2 games I had were like, and then the 4 games I got were like, well, whatever. There was something new to me, and there was the fact that I got that done and did that, and that may have sparked my interest for, there are other people like me out there who have these games that are just sitting there, and they want different games. Doesn't matter what they are. They just want something new to play. But they have these great games, but they're just sitting on their shelf, and they know other people have different games that are sitting on their shelf. So that kind of got me into, I think that's probably what sparked my interest to, like, I could just start trading games, selling games, not just with like my classmates and stuff like that, but like, people, across the country. And I didn't really get into that until more like the mid 90s, like 95, 96, when I finally got a computer and I could go online and find out there were other people just like me through I was like the Rec Arts Binary, it was one of those news groups, Rec Arts Binary Video Games or something like that. Or maybe it was like for trade, for sale or whatever. And went from there. I mean, I've been buying, selling, and trading games since the mid 90s. And that may have been the first deal I made over, not just with friends, like just across the country. And I mean, there really is no point or moral to this story, but this is, me back then, before the internet. It's like, man, I'm going to find a way. I'm going to find a way to make this work. Because by all means. And that was the only deal I did with those guys. Later on, I would purchase a couple of games from a couple other ads in the back of magazines, just because I could. And that was later on when I finally found out how to do a money order and stuff like that. Cash on delivery. I paid extra just so I could say, like, here are my games and here is your money, and call it good. Times are much different now, to say the least. But again, quick story for you. Thank you for watching. Thank you for hanging out with me just for a little while. I just wanted to share a little bit of my, my past, my, what happened back in my day when we didn't have the internet, when we didn't have stuff like that. And, I knew there were other people like me out there. Just didn't know how to get a hold of them, and the internet changed that for good, for good for me, and not for good like change it for good. It was a good thing. So anyway, thanks for hanging out for a little while, and just wanted to share that story with you. So I have more stories on the way. So cheers to you. Hope to see you again real soon.